I'm going to say something, I forgot what it was. We just finished, right? No, just kidding. You know, we've been these past weeks journeying and on this whole exploration of what does it mean to live as people of faith as we look at Jesus inviting us this way of living the sacred in our lives, of the way of love and reconciliation these past weeks. And today we want to continue to explore that. We have a clip. This is actually from the news this past week that I wanted to start out a time with. We want to go ahead and bring that up.
Emily Perks was fired because of the fact that she was receiving in vitro fertilization in order to conceive a child. Apparently she was diagnosed with a condition that makes her infertile, and doctors were hoping that maybe we can get you pregnant if we do in vitro fertilization.
So she was fired?
She was fired. Administrators at the school apparently were not happy about this because they're Catholic and they believe that it's against their religion.
It's not. It's a private school.
It is a private school. Now, Good Morning America did a piece on this. I want to show you guys the video, and then we'll discuss whether or not the school should get a pass.
Okay.
Like all diocese employees, Herc signed a contract to respect the Catholic faith, which the diocese that runs the school says forbids the procedures.
They fired her for wanting what probably everybody in their congregation has, is a family.
Herc says the school's pastor told her she was a, quote, grave immoral sinner, and her actions would cause a scandal if anyone found out.
If you're a religious school, you can now terminate any employee you want for any reason you want, even if it's for a discriminatory purpose.
So that's the law. However, she did file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and they basically opened the doors to a civil lawsuit. They said that she won, and she can file a civil lawsuit. So we'll see what happens from there. But this is probably one of the most ridiculous stories I've ever heard of, right?
Yeah, you know, there's certain, you know, again, we draw lines. We don't draw the lines at the end. There's a reasonable restriction that a Catholic school can make on its employees. One of them is not whether they conceive a child and the extent to which they work with their doctors and make that conception possible. I don't care what their religious position. They don't have to cover it with their insurance. You know, they can say, don't talk about it with your students. They can say all those things. They can't keep you from doing it.
There are so many things about this story that really puzzle me. For instance, I don't care where you work, right? Maybe it's different in some work environments. Like, I can imagine if I told you or whatever, whoever at work, hey, I'm getting in vitro because I'm infertile, it wouldn't really blow up in my face. But she trusted a teacher there and told the teacher what's happening to her. The teacher went and talked to administrators, and then a bishop at the school.
God loves a tattletale.
But why is it any of your business?
Yeah.
And she obviously confided in you. Anyway, I loathe that person because you just don't do that, right? And then they're concerned because they feel like embryos are lost in the process of in vitro fertilization. You know when else embryos are lost? Embryos are lost in like the first 8 weeks of pregnancy because the body sometimes naturally rejects it.
Yeah, look, then you get, when you get into the debate over when life begins, that's a debate they get to have.
Right.
It's a debate everybody gets to have. I mean, we feel pretty strongly about it, but it's a debate that other people feel strongly about it too. I get it. And by the way, I already was saying that they can keep her insurance from paying for it. She has insurance, and that's what her doctor, whatever. I don't even think insurance pays for that stuff. But whatever. You know, she's got to, you know, go forward. She gets to make her medical decisions, and the school doesn't get to get involved. Period. That's the end of the story.
Yeah, and also, she was one of the best teachers at the school. She got the highest marks, everybody loved her, and she was also the type of person who followed all of their religious policies, right? So, why are you going to take someone who believes in your religion and turn her against you?
You know who's a grave immoral sinner? The guy who runs the school.
Yeah,
You're
definitely.
a grave immoral sinner. You've done an immoral thing. You've committed a sin, and you've hurt this person, and you're getting bad publicity now, and good. And I hope it wrecks your school, but not at the expense of the students, only at the expense of you.
The lights here. So, what do you all think of that clip?
The problem is that you sign a contract stating that you're going to uphold the Catholic religion. But when you get into that and you sign your name to that dotted line, you know what the Catholic religion is about.
Right.
So whether it's an issue of right and wrong or woman's privacy or freedom,
Right.
when you sign a contract, you must
an interesting clip because pretty much almost anything you can think of with the whole issue of abortion came up in like 3 minutes. I mean, all the different aspects. And, you know, I actually I thought of this, a pastor friend of mine, she had shared this joke. He said there's a Catholic priest, a Unitarian Universalist pastor, and a rabbi who were talking about when does life begin. And the priest said, well, everyone knows life begins the moment of conception. The Unitarian Universalist pastor says, well, everyone knows life begins when the baby draws its first breath. And the rabbi goes, you're both wrong. Everyone knows life begins when the dog dies and the last kid leaves the house. We gotta start with a little laugh, humor, but every time I tell that, when you first start and you get two different viewpoints, you can sense the tension, and that's why I think it's really, you laugh so hard at the end. It's like, okay. But there's this huge tension on this issue, and we've been talking about violence in society and the death penalty and all these different things, and to me, I hate to say it, we're trying to say it in a careful way, but in many ways those issues are much easier. That as people of faith, we talk about all life and every person is sacred. It's a lot easier to talk about that no one's life should be taken. When we get to this, there's this real huge tension of, because life is development, when does it start? When does it? When is there personhood? When is there viability? What about choice? And I think this is a really tough one. In fact, I realize that while I've talked about this with people, I don't think I've ever preached on the issue before. And it's been a real wrestling thing for me. And so I want to, ask your grace as we go through this, because this has been really hard, and I'm not exactly sure so much how to approach all of this. Talk about when does life begin, and I think that's a really hard one with this, because I think one of the things they were saying, at least, is that there's a sense that for most people, the ends are much clearer than the middle, right? For some, the ends are clear, and that's often where we have difficulty. But because life develops, how do we decide? And who decides? And how do we figure this out? Are a few cells, that have been fertilized the same as a human being? How do we wrestle with that? I remember reading that that 16% of all pregnancies very early on in a miscarriage, often they're not even known that happens. So there's this sense early on where how clear is that? Now, much later, you get further on when you say this child, if it was taken out of the womb, would survive, then you can say, well, now that's a whole other end of the spectrum, and how do we wrestle with this? So I think those are things that we really need to look at. What does it mean to be a person? I'm a big fan of Star Trek. Maybe you ever watched Star Trek. We're going to talk Next Generation, because I think that's also Bridget's. But one of everybody's favorite characters, if you watch that, is Data, who is an android. And part of the whole wrestling with the character is he a person or not? How do you deal with this? And we watched actually some weeks back a scene where it was actually wrestling with faith, and we talked about how when he was discovered on this planet, he decided that he was going to see himself as a person, right? And it didn't matter what other people thought. In fact, there's another one where they're basically putting him on trial to decide if he's a person or not. And the guy who's opposed that, doesn't think he's a person, he's just a machine, keeps calling him Data, and he keeps correcting him, says it's Data. He goes, what does it matter? He says, well, one's my name, and the other's not. What was really intriguing as you watch it is like, deciding what it means to be a person is really, really hard. We think all of this is so clear, and it's just not. Where does that line get crossed? Now, one of the places we want to go is to the scriptures, and I'm curious, any of you know where in the scriptures it talks about abortion? It doesn't. It doesn't talk at all, which is, fascinating. I mean, when we talk about the issue of homosexuality, and there are some passages, very few passages that address that issue. Whether it addresses the way we think of it or not is another question. But there really aren't any passages, and so we look other places. And I want to invite us to wrestle with this. Go ahead and click this. Let me do this first. Before we get there, I think we need to address the issue of polarity. All right, polarity is. I should have slide this, but it used to be we had what was called a bell curve when it talked about public opinion on things. Right, and a bell curve is when the ends are very low, very few people are here, and the middle is very big. Right, so most people are in the middle. This is what we've seen lately, especially in our political realm, and issues like this is what they call an inverse bell curve, where the top, the ends are very high, and the middle is very low, that most people are on one side or the other, right? So we have this polarity. And this is a really hard one because, basically, anyone who's on the other side is the bad guy, right? If you consider yourself what the term pro-life, the other side is pro-death. If you're pro-choice, you look at the other side and you say they're anti-choice, right? Basically, we just divide. It's like, this is the issue and this is not. And it's very hard because each side will avoid the things that are the difficulty with their side of the issue. I mean, why this is such a difficult issue is that, they're intertwined. You can't separate. The child that grows as part of the mother's life. You can't split those things apart and just say they're separate issues. And so what was intriguing to me in reading this is the things that he's tend to say about each other. This is the negative side of if you are for abortion, if you're pro-choice, you've gone too far. And I shared about the guy I knew last week who was robbing armored cars because he wanted to buy abortion clinics. And I read about there was a guy a doctor who performed abortions who was murdered, and people who said he should not be put to death because what he did was right. And we really have to wrestle and raise questions: is that really the way of Jesus? You have people on the other side, though, who say that the other side brings up lies, and some things are, but also, I was reading one side that was saying people who are pro-life will lie to people and say that abortion is psychologically damaging. I'll say, well, maybe that's a strong term. On the other hand, anyone who's been through that journey or knows someone knows it is very traumatic. It is not something easy to go through. And so both sides wants to raise up theirs, negative spin on the other side. And I think we need to really wrestle with that and say, how do we deal with this as people of faith? I remember was listening to the radio a few years back, and they were talking about the issue of abortion. It was a Christian radio station. And they, like most groups that oppose, that are pro-life, we use the term, or as the term is used, I guess is the best way, would oppose health care for all because most often health care for all allows for abortion. And they were interviewing a priest, an Episcopalian priest, from an Anglican priest because he was from England, where in England they have universal health care. And they were saying, well, how can you support that? Because it allows abortions. And he says, in England, we have health care that covers abortions if people want it. He says, but we have far fewer abortions than you do here in the United States because people who have health care have kids. And often people choose abortion because they don't have the health care that they need to go through that process. It was very intriguing to me because basically one says we can never support this. It says, really if the goal is that we may not be able to end it, but if we want less, then this is a better route. But there's a struggle. And I remember getting a call some years ago too. It was actually from, I think it was Wisconsin Right to Life, and they asked me, do you think there should be fewer abortions? They didn't say, are you pro-life or pro-choice or any of those kind of things. And I said, well, yeah. I think there should be fewer abortions. They said, oh, it's so good to talk to someone who's pro-life. We just got our pro-life candidate in. I'm like, well, I didn't vote for that candidate. And I voted for a different one because they wanted jobs for everybody and health care, for everybody, which I think would bring down the abortions much more than just laws against it.